I'm joined now by the MP, Rebecca Long-Bailey, who was, of course, a leading member of Jeremy Corbyn's shadow cabinet. Thank you so much for coming in. I mean, it's been really interesting looking back at what Jeremy Corbyn, but others, including current cabinet ministers, have said about Waspi women. What was your reaction to today's news?
I think shock was the best way I can describe it. I co-chair an all-party parliamentary group on state pension inequality for women. It's a cross-party group of MPs, and we've done extensive research into this matter for a number of years. We had testimony from so many 1950s women who'd faced terrible injustice. Some had lost their homes, lost their jobs, lost their dignity. And when we received the Ombudsman's report after that 6-year investigation, of course, it wasn't what many had hoped for in terms of the redress proposals that were put within there. But we expected the government to act on the recommendations, because that's the usual course of action. When the Ombudsman produces a report for government, the government responds and usually acts on the recommendations. And for that not to happen today was very, very worrying.
The word betrayal's been used. Would you use that word?
I think the 1950s women would feel betrayed because they'd hoped to see something today from government. And I hope that the government revisits this, because it's a question not just about the injustice itself and what these women have faced, but it's also about making sure that we have a system where an ombudsman can produce a report for government and hold government to an account. Because remember, if this was a company that had done this to 1950s women and had been very clearly found guilty of maladministration, we'd expect that government to pay compensation. So why would the government treat injustice any differently?
I guess the thing that Keir Starmer would say is that, I mean, in many ways, this is a very different party. We've seen the extent of that. I mean, even people like you being taken out of the party to an extent. Do you think that he would say this is no longer a party of campaign, this is a party that has to make tough choices, that has to govern? Has he not got a point there?
This isn't about campaigning, it's about injustice. These women were wronged in the same way that the postmasters were wronged in the Horizon scandal, and you expect governments to accept wrongdoing, apologise and provide compensation and redress where that's appropriate. And that's what the Ombudsman recommended. The Ombudsman wasn't a campaigner. They looked into detailed investigations to assess whether the government was guilty of maladministration, found that that was the case, found that the women had suffered injustice and recommended that the government compensate them. It's as simple as that, and that's what we hope the government would do. And I hope they do revisit this and look at it again.
It costs money. £10 billion. I mean, where would you get that money? That's going to mean strain elsewhere, schools, prisons.
That's right. It was estimated between 3.5 and 10 billion, and it would depend on the kind of scheme that the government rolled out. So, for example, they could look at the amount of years lost from a lady's pension when they were notified and taper it accordingly, because some women would have faced far worse circumstances than others who had received far more notice. But that's up to the government to place such a scheme before Parliament and to find the means to be able to do that, because it's not about pitting one injustice against another. You can't decide that one group of wrong people deserve compensation but the others don't.
But I guess there are differences between the postmasters case and the Waspi women's case.
It's still an injustice. It's still an injustice. And what are we going to say?
So the government should pay for all injustices.
What message would that send to the 1950s women? Well, that injustice is far more important than you. And what does it say about future injustices? When there is wrongdoing and it's been clearly recommended by an independent ombudsman that the government should look at a scheme of redress, the government should strain every sinew to be able to do that.
I mean, I guess, you know, should the government be... I'm making these points because the government aren't in today, so I think it's important that we get these points across. But, you know, should they be responsible for making sure that everyone knows about every single law change? Like, you know, if the drinking age was raised, should everyone... How does the government make sure that everyone knows these things?
I think this is a very specific case, and it would have been far more prudent for the government to inform women directly. They could have done it in a number of ways that it was recommended in the early stages of this change occurring. They could have sent through direct mails. They didn't do such an operation effectively. When you look at what actually happened, it was very chaotic. A little bit of a direct mail was carried out, then it was paused. There were government adverts put in newspapers, but only certain newspapers that didn't reach all of the women that were affected. Well, they could have also done something as simple as putting a statement on a piece 2060 that every single woman would have got at the end of every tax year, notifying them that their pension age was changing. It was a simple change to make, and the government should have acted upon it sooner when they realised between 2013 and 2016 that women were reporting that they didn't know about the change.
What do you think happens next? I mean, is this the end of it?
I don't think it's going to be the end of it. I think these ladies are a formidable force, and they're certainly going to continue the campaign, and they'll have the support of a number of MPs across Parliament.
Is Starmer going to regret this?
I hope not, because I hope he revisits it and realises...
Would have to regret it to revisit it.
Well, I hope that he realises the scale of injustice here, and that he really does address the concerns that are being raised by these 1950s women.
Were you surprised?
I was very surprised, very surprised.
All right, Rebecca Long-Bailey, thank you so much for coming in.